I'm also, Zachary del Rosario. I'm a professor at Olin College. I started with the college in 2020. And the story I'm going to tell you is what this journey looked like. Because it was a very strange experience making the jump from being a student, going out into the world, and then coming back and being a professor at the same college. Right now, I hold, the distinction of being the only Olin alum who's a full-time faculty member at the college. So my story is one of very, very deep ignorance and foolishness. So I remember having this conversation with Brian Story once, which was, I went to him and I was like, okay, Brian, you have this job that I want. I want to come back and I want to teach at Olin. And he looked at me and he said, well, Zach, you better get a PhD from Harvard, Stanford, or Caltech. I was like, okay, great. What's a PhD? And also, where's Stanford? I haven't heard of that place before.
And not Berkeley?
It was weird, right? Because he did his degree there. And I still don't understand this from him. He thinks I'm mistaken, but I remember exactly what he said. And so, not everyone goes off to do a graduate degree. So I think that it's worth unpacking what exactly a PhD is and how it's different. So I think this is potentially one way someone could think about what a PhD is. I've met some people who seem to operate this way, where we do kindergarten through 12th grade, we go on, we do college, maybe that's like 13th through 16th grades, and then like grad school, wouldn't that just be like 17th through God knows what grade, can we even count that high? This is a really poor frame of what actually doing a PhD is, what going to grad school is. You could think of it like this, where, okay, K-12, we're taking like very general courses, we're getting a broad knowledge base, and then you go into college, you choose a major, you do something more focused. Well, then grad school, that would just be like specialized classes, right? Where you start to narrow down to a thing. This is less wrong, but it still doesn't quite capture the important point here, which is there's a master's degree, which is specialized courses usually, but a PhD is a degree in inventing new knowledge. And that's something that's fundamentally different. Going through a PhD, they only give you that degree if you get to a point where you can add to the body of what is known and what is accepted as knowledge. So it turns out to be really, really hard and really, really weird, very confusing, and it takes an indeterminate period of time to actually learn how to do that. So one neat thing, and one thing I certainly didn't understand when I was around all these faculty as a student, was all these people that were being taught by, they're people who have a past life in inventing new knowledge, which is kind of nuts. Whereas John likes to stress out about sometimes, where, if you were sitting next to Michael Jordan, wouldn't you ask him questions about basketball? It's like, why is it sometimes when we're sitting in class, the students aren't asking us any questions? What a missed opportunity. At least John seems to be frustrated by this sort of thing. So, what this journey was for me was basically like 6 years of rain boot camp. It was hard, it was isolating at times, but it really taught me to think very differently going through and actually doing a PhD. It's something I'm very, very glad that I did. So I did it, I went to Stanford, I got my PhD, defended this thesis successfully, wrote some papers and did some stuff, and then got to Olin and started teaching as a faculty member. But when I was there was some feeling that I started to have that something was kind of different about now being back at Olin in this different context. And I think I at least have some framing now as to what was different, which was Olin viewed from inside as a student feels kind of like this, where Olin is a very student-centered organization. There's a lot of effort that the faculty and staff are expending to try to keep students happy and supported. And so this is part of why I wanted to come back and teach at Olin, that I had this very positive sentiment towards Olin. But it looks very different when now you're on the other side of this circle. And now it's my job to provide all of that support and to figure out how to actually create this kind of environment. And I think I didn't really understand how unique that was until I went to another institution and saw how different the world could actually look at a different college. So this is a real conversation I heard at Stanford once, where a student was asking a staff person, okay, I'm trying I'm trying to find Dr. Fancy Pants right now, and they stop them and they're like, no, we don't call them doctor here, we call them professor. And this was very, very strange to hear the first time. I remember when I was at Stanford, when I was at a very different style of institution, this kind of thinking was really pervasive throughout the entire place. And I think this is emblematic of what it feels like to be at a different college, where there's a very wide gulf between, say, faculty and students. And I remember actually committing some like social faux pas at first, when I was first a graduate student, like kind of expecting professors to take me seriously. And it's a very, very different world. It's very shocking. So, viewed from the outside, like now as a faculty member, not at the center of that student-centered organization, but now as someone who's working, it actually takes a lot of work. Like being on the other side on faculty meetings, there's a lot of stress that actually we're going through, trying to figure out how do we actually support our students? How do we actually do right by them? So there's a shit ton of effort that's happening to actually create this kind of environment. And I think this was a realization that I had, that I now have a very different relationship to the place that nurtured me and that now I need to be a part of in a very different way. But one way I feel like I got really lucky is I actually really like this work. It turns out that I actually really enjoy getting to be a part of an organization that is very nurturing. It happens to align with my values and the kind of thing that I want to do with my life. So I think you might be wondering, like, okay, that all sounds well and good in terms of like how it feels, but what do you actually do? Like, what do faculty actually get up to? So I want to show you a little bit of inside baseball. This is the way that faculty at not just Olin, but at institutions everywhere actually think about the kind of work that we do. And we take our activities as faculty and we really organize it into three areas, three buckets. So there's teaching, there's service, and there's research. Teaching is most of what we get to see when we're students, like the thing that we're actually directly interacting with faculty through. Service is like working on committees, like sort of turning the gears behind the scenes. And then research is going and actually doing scholarly work. And some students actually get a chance to see that. Here has seen a lot of work that Whitney does and has gotten to see what research looks like. So a traditional university looks like this. Part of the reason that Stanford felt so different is that Stanford doesn't exist really to train students. And Polina's nodding her head right now because she also went to Stanford. Stanford exists to generate knowledge. So there's a tiny amount of teaching that professors are doing. There's a tiny amount of service they're doing. All of their attention is really focused on knowledge generation. And it's why it feels so different to go to somewhere like Stanford. And the thing is, what I thought Olin was, at least when I was a student, was this. That the language we have about what Olin is about is it's a place that's about doing engineering education differently. And at the face of it, it probably sounds like, okay, then all of our professors are probably focused on teaching. But something I was kind of surprised by is, no, it actually looks a little bit more balanced like this, where, yeah, there's a lot of work that our faculty are doing on teaching, and especially on teaching well, but a lot of our faculty are actually very engaged in scholarship. So Whitney would be one example of someone, what's the dollar value of like the grant that she just got? It's like in the millions, right?
Close.
Yeah, like, you know, faculty like Whitney Rollauer are extremely active, or say going out and winning NSF grants. There are folks like, I think Amon actually is a television showrunner now. He actually has a TV program that he's helping to produce. Like, our faculty are extremely engaged in a way that's external to the college, and there's some service stuff we need to do too. So this is what it looks like in terms of distribution of effort. And that means that now I'm actually responsible for doing a bunch of stuff. I had no idea what was going on when I was a student. But actually, what Olin looks like is something slightly different from that, where we call things slightly different at Olin. We think of our circles in a different way. And I can get into this more if people are actually interested. Basically, we think about, instead of teaching, more holistically developing students. Instead of just purely research, we think about external impact. So say the kind of stuff that Amon does, being a showrunner, that wouldn't be research in another institution, but it's valid at Olin because it has impact external to the college. We also talk about building and sustaining the college. It's something that's kind of like our service. What's also kind of cool about Olin is we deliberately allow for overlap between these circles. So if one is strategic, as a faculty member, you can actually find this faculty nirvana, where you're hitting all of these areas that we are judged by, say, with one set of activities, which is pretty cool. Not many other institutions allow you to do that sort of thing. So you might also be thinking, okay, that's a bunch of abstract nonsense. There's a bunch of weird frameworks that are showing us. What do you actually do? Can you show us an example? And so I thought it might be fun to talk about what I'm working on now. So these are actual slides that I was using in a recent faculty meeting where we're blowing up Monson. I think that's a classic. I've seen a yes here. Well, I'm wondering where's that coming from, man? Tell me more about that.
Mechanical engineering's first software class. Just some holdover grief.
Holdover grief?
No, it was a fine class. It was.
Well, I didn't teach you Monson, so you're free to show.
I had Alan Downey teach me Monson. It was an experience. No, sorry to derail.
I'll tell you my anxieties about Monson.
All catalytic data, right?
What's that?
All catalytic data.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, hopefully somebody is scrubbing this.
I'm on camera.
So I would say with Monsim, what we're trying to accomplish is we're trying to get students to understand this picture. This is the way we frame what modeling is. So we have some sort of real world system that we're trying to understand. We can go, we can take some measurements in order to get some data as a quantitative measure on that system. We want to build some sort of model, and the way we do that is going through making some abstraction choices. Those abstractions give us a simplification that's tractable to run in a computer. We do a simulation to generate some virtual data, and then we can make a comparison to see if that model is actually valid, and then use it to do useful. There's a problem, is I do read your reflections, I do read student reflections through this class, and often, very often, I see comments like, I wish my model were more complicated. And I will tell you that kind of statement makes me very, very sad. Because one, it's just a statement about insecurities, not particularly happy to see that, but also, it's an indicator to me that students are not necessarily seeing that even a simple model can be very useful. This to me is an indication that our students are not really seeing the importance of abstraction. And I think the problem lies in here. So this is the arc of what Monsim is currently, and I think it's been like this actually for a very long time. I know this is roughly the same thing I took when I took Monsim. I don't know, Lee, did you have Monsim when you were?
Yeah, I think it had a different name, but it was, but it was similar. ODEs with rocks and flows.
Yeah.
What was that? Simulation? You probably don't use simulation anymore.
I don't know if they use that in the circuits class anymore. I remember we used Simulate, but we're in MATLAB, at least for Monsim, like for the coding part, not the simulating part. I feel like most folks here probably recognize this kind of layout.
So I think they had classes when Melina went to Olin, right?
Wait,
You didn't have
Did you
classes.
No, there's no classes.
This is true. Partner.
It's true. No, we had classes that were really hard, and they were the worst iteration of classes that were ever
And then you rebelled.
Yes, there was the rebellion.
That did happen. They told us it's true. So I think we all recognize, well, many of us recognize this model of Mod 7. But I want to point out an issue here, which is there are 5 different physical systems, 5 different modeling domains that we're talking about here. We start, at least right now, by talking about light shares, then we do disease transmission, we do HIV, virion cell dynamics stuff. I have to look this up every time we teach this worksheet. I can't remember what a virion is for the life of me. We teach thermodynamics in 1 week, and then we expect students to go into a project based on that? That's nuts. And then we do mechanical systems to top it all off. This, I think, is really the problem when it comes to why our students are not really appreciating the importance of abstraction, because switching domains is where we really lose our intuition that we need in order to do credible abstraction. So making reasonable abstraction choices really demands a thorough understanding of whatever system we're trying to study. Switching to 5 different modeling domains means we get a really crude understanding of each of those different domains. That's what's preventing, I believe, preventing our students from making sensible abstraction choices. So what I'm doing this summer, the way I'm actually blowing up the course, is we're simplifying things. So rather than jumping around to a whole bunch of different modeling domains, we're going to focus on the same thing, but we're going to take different passes at it. So we're going to continue to do disease transmission for this early project one, and we're going to come back to it using different tools. So we're still going to do SIR models. That gives us a very crude representation of a population, which just counts the number of people in all these buckets. But then we can come back along and we can say, well, now let's start treating people as individuals. And we can use some graph theory to represent the social connectivity between them. And that way we can say, take an SIR model and put it in direct comparison with something like an agent-based model and say, when does this SIR model actually give us similar behavior as an agent-based one? When were our assumptions valid or invalid? When are we making reasonable choices? When do they break down? And we can do a similar thing by sort of undoing the course grading within individuals by introducing some coupling-based models to start treating people as different, to say different people have a different propensity to catch a disease. This is the way that I'm planning to redo the course to try to get at giving our students a better understanding of abstraction. What's really cool about this, like actually getting to now do this work, is actually my ninjas came back and suggested, well, Zach, if this is the model we're going in, we want to take worksheet 1 and actually double down on this. So just earlier this week, a couple of students, we've got some students working with us on doing this redesign, they came back to me and said, we have all these new ideas for what we want to do with day 1 in the worksheets. Let's like design a game for the students to play where they generate the data sets and then they do their modeling to try to fit that data set. Let's see if we can represent disease dynamics through some sort of activity, which is really cool to see. It's part of why I really love working with all the students, because they'll just jump in and get energized and come up with cool ideas that I never could. And down here, alluding to this faculty nirvana idea, this is where I can actually take some of the research that I'm doing now, things like human subjects work on how engineers reason about variability. This is where I can start to incorporate some of my research and actually hit multiple of my circles at once. So, in closing, I think Olin is a really special place. I mean, we kind of all, I think, get that, but it really took me going somewhere else, going to do a graduate degree elsewhere to see in what ways are we actually different from other places? Why does that matter and why is that different? One thing that's really cool about Olin that I didn't really get as a student, but now I get as a faculty member, is that things like integrated research and teaching are really interesting features. You can be a faculty member here. And also, it is super weird teaching on John Getty's. It's a bizarre experience.